All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to Marijuana's True Impact on Colorado, a symposium at Colorado Christian University. Initially we were thinking up of names. We thought, hey, let's call this Weed Fest 2017, but not so much. Probably wouldn't work too well here at CCU. Well, good morning. My name is Jeff Hunt. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy at Colorado Christian University. I'm the director of our think tank, the Centennial Institute. And we're so grateful that you joined us for a day-long conversation on the true impact of marijuana here in Colorado. Now, at CCU, we always start our events with a prayer and a pledge. So if you don't mind, please stand and join us for prayer. We're going to be leading us in prayer is Courtney Rainier, and leading us in the pledge is Ben Lindstrom.
Good morning, everybody. I'm actually going to read you guys a prayer, just so I think it fits this event. Very formal, very precise. So if you can bow your heads in prayer with me. Dear Lord, today as we come to you, we want to humbly thank you for this beautiful day that you have given us. We want to thank you for providing students, faculty members of Colorado Christian University with this amazing opportunity to invite our local community into our home as we advocate for you and your truth. Lord, we are filled with such gratitude for the ability to respectfully evaluate, discuss, and even disagree on current issues in our world on such a loving yet logical public platform. We want to thank you for the capacity to think inquisitively and communicate in such a variety of ways while respecting all perspectives, even as they may contradict our own. Our hope for today is that we will be able to open a collective dialogue about our culture today for our community, while inspiring all people from all different walks of life to open their minds and their hearts to what we will be hearing today from our speakers throughout this morning and this afternoon. We pray that our speakers today speak from a place of logic, understanding, productivity, kindness, and truth. And ultimately, Lord, we want to pray to you that you lead us in truth, for we understand that you are and always will be the way, the truth, and the light. In your name we pray. Amen.
Y'all join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
Aren't our students here at CCU great? That was a wonderful prayer. Thank you very much. Well, with the symposium today, I hope you will connect with a variety of different speakers. We have experts in healthcare, education, law enforcement, business, public policy, and more. And I have 3 goals for today. Number 1, that we have a better understanding of the true impact of marijuana commercialization in Colorado. We really want to dive in deep to the truth of what's happening here. Secondly, I hope that you will connect with fellow like-minded people who share our concerns about the safety and well-being of Colorado. I hope that we can work together, develop friendships, and move forward from this symposium. And finally, thirdly, I hope that we can develop public policy that will reduce the impact of illicit drugs in Colorado. I think no matter where you are on marijuana, bottom line, we want a better Colorado. And so the question is, how can we work together to enact better public policy? Well, we're going to get right to it and introduce one of our first keynote speakers. We are so proud to have the president and CEO of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, Dr. Kevin Sabet, with us this morning. Described by NBC as the prodigy of drug politics and policy, Dr. Sabet is an author, consultant, former advisor to 3 U.S. presidential administrations, assistant professor, and serves as the president and CEO of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which he founded with former Congressman Patrick Kennedy in 2013. He has studied, researched, written about, and implemented drug policy for almost 20 years. He has worked in the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and in 2011, he stepped down after serving more than 2 years as a senior advisor to President Obama's drug control director, having been the only drug policy staffer to have ever served as a political appointee in a Democrat and Republican administration. He has served since at the Aspen Ideas and New York festivals, or he has appeared since at the Aspen Ideas and New York festivals, on the Organization of American States Blue Ribbon Commission, advising hemispheric drug policy, and in hundreds of forums and discussions promoting the ideas outlined in his first book, Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana, published by Buford. He has been featured on the front page of the New York Times and in virtually every major media publication and news channel on the subject of drug policy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Kevin Sabet.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a very, very kind introduction. It was exactly the way we practiced it outside, so thank you. No, good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you and to laugh a little at a very sobering subject, I think. And so many of you I've had the privilege of learning from and working with as you're struggling here in ground zero, which is what it is. It's ground zero for this public health and public safety disaster that is not about the legalization of marijuana, actually, but about the commercialization, promotion, advertising, normalization of intoxication, starting with marijuana. And it's amazing here at Colorado Christian University to be here and the leadership that Jeff and his staff have provided, not only with this conference, but with all the work that you've done prior to this and the other great people you have in this state, the different groups that have been involved and certainly have put in a lot of time on this issue. Interesting to be here at Colorado Christian because in many ways I feel like marijuana has become a religion, a love affair. For so many people. And it's a love affair, I think, whose profit, I would say false profit, is greed and money. And that this is much more about a small number of people getting very rich than it is about some lofty goals, reducing incarceration or making sure that we have criminal justice reform and social justice, which we all want. But it has absolutely turned into something that is really all about the money. You know, if you can imagine, it's interesting also to be in Colorado, which has now, I believe, the second highest rate of opiate overdose in the country. And people say, well, can't marijuana be a substitute? What's amazing about the opiate epidemic is, folks, we know how this story ends with commercial intoxication. I mean, we have the example with our opiates. We have the example of companies that started promoting something as medicine and got rich off of that intoxication. And we're all bemoaning the fact that we have this opiate epidemic and what can we do? And yet at the same time, it seems like we're opening our arms out and our doors, rolling out the red carpet for yet another industry, very, very similar to the opiate epidemic. And what's amazing is, I meet so many people who have confused the potential medical potential, a promise that may be in the marijuana plant. And there may be kids with seizures that benefit from certain oils that don't get you high and certain formulations of that. But what the industry has so brilliantly done is confused all of these issues together. And they say we need to legalize and commercialize marijuana because this kid has seizures. Or they also confuse criminalization, that we need to legalize in order for young, especially men, communities of color, not to be imprisoned and commercialized, mixing up all of these issues and confusing the American people. If you just think about it for a minute, can you imagine if Purdue Pharma, which produces OxyContin, imagine if Purdue Pharma said one day they came out with a blockbuster drug that they were announcing to the press, but they said, we're not going to go through the FDA to see if it passes scientific muster. We're not going to allow this drug to be dispensed at pharmacies. Instead, what we're going to do is run a political campaign for a few years and see if the people agree that this drug should be made legal. If they did that, we'd put those CEOs in prison. There wouldn't be any discussion. But exactly 10, 15 years ago here, we did that with something called medical marijuana. And no doubt about it, it was about softening our attitudes towards a drug that didn't have a great reputation, I think for good reason. And now, of course, we've moved on from that. It's great to see young people here. And what's amazing about it is this is really all about them. It's really all about your future in so many ways. And what's also incredible is that I would guarantee that no one under 20 in this room knows who the Marlboro Man is or Joe Camel, which is see, they're not making any, because they don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm so happy you don't know what I'm talking about. That warms our hearts. Trust me, it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. But think about that for a minute. we all know who those mascots are. We all remember smoking sections in restaurants. I had a 20-year-old come up to me the other day who said he didn't believe me when I said that at one point we thought in society it made sense to allow smoking at 40,000 feet in the air in a small metal tube that already doesn't have a lot of oxygen. That was considered okay at one point. And how much progress we've made, but that progress, folks, if you think about it, is no laughing matter. It was done at the expense of millions of lives lost. 80 years or 100 years of lies and deceit from an industry, this time it was the tobacco industry, that said that they had a product. First they said it was medical, which they did. They even said it would cure asthma, if you can believe that. We have the ads, it's real. I didn't believe that when I heard it, but it's real. Then they said it's only for adults. Then they said the candies and chewing gums and things that appeal to young people really are not about young people. They're really meant for adults. Then they said we should allow it in public spaces. And then they talked about the rights of smokers. And we took that hook, line, and sinker. And then finally, sort of, recently we've woken up to the fact that they were lying to us for almost a century. Tobacco wasn't that deadly before the invention of the modern cigarette. And we've had tobacco used for a long time in society. The incidence of lung cancer and things going on with it came because of the marketing and promotion and new products developed by an industry that wants to get rich. And so today, when I talk to a lot of parents who think marijuana is no big deal, they say, well, at least my kid's not using heroin or drinking, they might say. The marijuana that, of course, they're familiar with is not resembling at all the THC products, the waxes that are 99% pure, is the claim, which is an incredible claim, given that I guarantee you all the research today about the harms of marijuana is being done on marijuana less than 10% THC. It's looking at longitudinal studies over time when no one could imagine you could have above 30%, let alone 99% pure wax. The parents don't understand what the edibles and these other things, because edibles in their time were some brownies that their dorm mate made, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't the ice creams, cookies that are appealing to young people. And so I think there's just a radical disconnect right now between where the science is and where most people are on this issue. And I, for one, can tell you, I don't think it's too late to be pushing back. Folks, we're next month will be year 5, 5th anniversary of Amendment 64 passing. It took our country, sadly, 90 years to wake up from our nightmare of tobacco. I hope it doesn't take 90 years. I hope we don't have to have our hand burn on the stove to realize the stove is on. It might, but I am fully confident that with your help and the help of, there's so many great people and groups in here, Smart Colorado's done such incredible work in pushing back. People like Joe McGuire and our SAM affiliate working with workplaces and others to get the word out. Seeing people like Justin Luke Riley, the head of Young People in Recovery, who's actually now taking a larger role with his blog, The Green Brick, and then moving on from that. I am confident, and obviously the leadership at CCU, and so many other people, Dr. Ken Finn here, so many folks, parents, Aubrey, others that are here. I am convinced that this thing can be turned around. I know it's hard because you're living in an environment where, it takes me 4 rental cars when I come to Denver International to get one that doesn't smell like marijuana. And so I get the culture here. When I bring this up to people, which I try to talk about this, for them it's, well, I don't know, it doesn't really affect me, or it's fine. I guess it's regulated and we're getting some tax dollars. I get that you can easily feel disturbed by what's happening, but I am confident that this is something that history, as Patrick Kennedy has told me, whose dad fought big tobacco for so long, history will not look kindly upon the folks who let this happen. And none of you can be blamed for the modern tobacco epidemic. You weren't around 100 years ago when we could have stopped this. You certainly weren't around 5,000 years ago when alcohol became normalized. And our 2 legal drugs are the 2 biggest killers of all. Tobacco and alcohol kill 11 times as many people in this country yearly than opiates right now. And we're saying we're in an opiate epidemic, which we are, because it's a huge problem, the biggest of the opiates we've ever had. But when you compare that relative to what our legal drugs do, and when you compare the heroin and fentanyls to what our the impact of our legal drugs, when you have the apparatus of commercialization behind you, that's a very deadly combination. And I think that we can learn from the past and hopefully not repeat a lot of these mistakes. Let's see. Maybe we can just switch the PowerPoint, although I'm fascinated. I can't wait to hear my old colleague, former colleague, Dr. Murray at the White House talk. But maybe if we just switch some of those slides up to my presentation, I'm happy to talk. But what's amazing about... Sure, can I? Do you mind? I can't give it like you can. Oh, I learn from the best here. So, well, maybe if I just go forward all the way, it'll get me there. That's what he was going to do. Great. Okay, there we go. If you just do that. What's amazing is that if you could start from that first slide here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's good. Florida, great. What's amazing is that in the last 10 years, we've seen actually a big reduction in drugs among young people. Actually, young people today are not using drugs the way that, when I hate to age many of you, but a lot of the generation in here might have used. I mean, in the 1970s, we were using way more drugs than we are now in terms of on a regular basis. And many of you remember those days. But in terms of marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, the numbers are actually much higher back then. In fact, we're in an opiate epidemic, but in the last 10 years among high school seniors, all drugs except for marijuana have gone down 23%. Folks, the opiate epidemic, let's be very clear, because you might be thinking, why are we talking about marijuana when Colorado's the second largest state, highest state in the country for opiate deaths and opiate abuse? Because, folks, it's all connected. Substance abuse problems are polysubstance abuse problems. They're not done in a vacuum. The opiate epidemic in this country today is not a 14-year-old who wakes up and says, I'm going to inject heroin today. I've never done drugs before. It's a 35 to 40-year-old white male who's overdosed an average of 6 times, been in and out of treatment half a dozen times, who doesn't get lucky the next time the overdose happens, and has a 25 to 30-year history of alcohol and other drug abuse. That is the opiate epidemic. And so we can absolutely treat it at the end, and there's a lot we can do for people that unfortunately have gone down that path, and we need to do a much better job with those folks, no doubt about it. But we also got to think about what can we do to stop this progression. And I'm not here to throw out the gateway theory, which a lot of people have very strong opinions, but there's no opinion, it's factual, that the vast majority of those dying of our overdoses today have had and tried and used a lot of marijuana and alcohol in their life. And how that contributed is an interesting discussion to talk about, but there's no doubt that it's 98% or so of people abusing heroin absolutely have marijuana early on. Now, by the way, the majority of marijuana users don't go on to heroin either. So again, you can have an argument either way, but if I'm looking at the people who are dying today, I can't divorce marijuana, alcohol, benzodiazepines, all the other substances that are going on with that. And so you can't say, why are you talking about marijuana when you should be talking about alcohol? What's interesting is while every drug is down among seniors, high school seniors, marijuana is the only drug that's slightly up according to Monitoring the Future. Now, among younger kids, 12 to 17, we've actually seen a national reduction in marijuana use. Interesting. But folks, don't confuse national data with what's going on in your neighborhood or your state. And this is where the manipulation with the statistics happens by people who it is in their financial interest to say, the old saying, problem? What problem? We're fine. Things are going great. And sadly, a lot of people in government, and these are well-meaning people, they now have to defend what, quote unquote, the voters have told them to do. So they're in such a defensive posture, and obviously with our political dynamics of today, it doesn't help. They feel attacked. Have you ever heard a politician get up and say, I'm going to have a press conference today to talk about the bad things going on in the state? No. So you're not going to be seeing that press conference anytime soon. And I understand. I've worked with politicians. I get how that works. But that should not cloud what the data is actually saying. A study that just came out the other day that I have to highlight early is that people with marijuana use were more than twice as likely to go on to abuse opiates and have an opiate use disorder or have an incidence of opiate use. And this was published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Now, again, the baby boomer generation, a lot of them are going to laugh at this. We never, we have so many successful people that have used marijuana, and they're just fine. I know a lot of people, and no doubt there are a lot of people who are successful that have used marijuana. Absolutely. Some geniuses that have had a great life. Just like there are so many people that drive 20 miles over the speed limit that never get into a car crash. Think of it like a speed limit. Most people who drive over the speed limit are fine. Actually, and I hesitate to say this with young people around, but most people who don't wear a seatbelt are actually fine too. It's amazing. But if you don't wear a seatbelt or you speed on a freeway, you're 6 to 7 times more likely to get into a serious car crash. So there will be people who will be just fine and not have these problems. That does not mean that this behavior doesn't increase the risk of problems. And if you're in the addictive industry, which you're in if you're in the marijuana industry in Colorado, you are banking on the fact that people are using your product a lot. You don't care about, I hate to say it again, the age in this room, it is not about all of you. I hate to say it, but it just isn't. It's not about all of you, smoking a joint once a month in your basement and whatever, and that's not what the industry cares about. The alcohol industry could care less if you have a glass of wine with dinner. That doesn't put profits in their pockets. What puts profits in their pockets is this table right over here. This is where the money is. This is where all the money is. It's getting young minds hooked on this love affair. And by the way, if you want to, you could justify that in any way by just typing in Google, is marijuana good or bad? Or, and the industry loves to pay for the Google results. When you Google something, someone's paying for what you see. And so this is about an addictive industry that gets rich off of a small number of people. They don't need you to be addicted. God bless you. Most of your brains are developed. You've decided what you like. Have you seen a Coke or McDonald's commercial lately focusing on the over 40 set? No. Coke and McDonald's, they want to hook these guys. It's past for you. Hate to say it, for them. It's the same thing with marijuana. And so we started SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, to try and push back on this. Republicans and Democrats coming together and saying, at the very least, slow this train down. We've had a disastrous tobacco industry, a disastrous pharmaceutical industry, alcohol. Why do this again? And we've partnered with scientists. What's amazing about scientists, and I have a PhD, so I feel like I can say this. There's no PR in PhD. We're not trained to get our science out into language that people can understand. We're trained to speak in science speak. And how many Americans do you think read the Journal of the American Medical Association last night before going to bed? Not that many. But the average person, especially young person, Googles, is marijuana addictive? And hey, Kevin, one kid said, Wikipedia told me that it wasn't addictive. So how can that be wrong? People verify that, Kevin. Well, let's see who verifies the marijuana page on Wikipedia. You'd be surprised. It's not the editors of Lancet Psychiatry or the Annals of Internal Medicine. And so the science is not being translated out there. And we're trying to do that by working with scientists around the country. Now, you've heard marijuana's on this march. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It's being legal. Support is at an all-time high. How many of you knew that every state that tried to legalize in 2017 failed? How many of you knew that Vermont vetoed in Vermont? In Vermont, that's Bernie Sanders' country, folks. How many of you knew that in Rhode Island, in the north, a lot of these northeastern states, when it goes through the legislature, you have to actually have some reason and arguments, and you're accountable to the people in your district. It's a lot harder to pass this. Now, when you have $30 million and a TV ad campaign like you did with Amendment 64, and an opposition that could barely raise $1 million because we never thought this would actually happen, it's a lot more likely to pass because you can say whatever you want on those 30-second commercials. And they're brilliant commercials. But when you actually have to talk about it for more than 30 seconds, these issues get tricky because we start to ask questions. Where are the pot shops going to be? Are you cool with them being in your neighborhood? Well, no, I don't want them over there. I want them over there. Well, how about you? Are you okay? No. Okay, well, are you good with legalizing marijuana edibles that are attractive to kids? And by the way, I was happy to see that the gummies aren't happening anymore. Yeah, it took 2 years. And the industry made a lot of money off of them. They're very happy. They're moving on to the next product line. You know, it's swimming upstream constantly when that happens. But when you start to ask these difficult questions, where are the pot shops going to be? What kind of marijuana are you legalizing? Are you legalizing THC 98% waxes? Or are you legalizing? I had a woman the other day say, Kevin, this is just about a roach clip. I had to ask her what a roach clip was, because I'm 38. I'm not yet at that. You know, nobody under 40 knows what that is. And then I said, well, what are you doing about dabbing? She had no idea what I was talking about. So there is a huge cultural disconnect. Again, I feel like I'm aging all of us here, but again, no one under 30 knows who Cheech and Chong is. This isn't about like a stoner movie, okay? This isn't about a stoner movie. I mean, I know they might know Tommy Chong because I think he was on Dancing with the Stars or something, but you know, when I talk to high school kids and talk about Cheech and Chong and think I'm gonna get a laugh, boy, am I in for it. Please look at the faces of everybody under 20, okay? Folks, this isn't about that anymore. It's about an industry with guys that look like me. It's guys that look like this. It's the guys I went to Oxford with. They have billion-dollar business plans. I'm speaking to the choir. They have Ivy League degrees. And so I have a feeling that if voters thought it was about this, rather than this false dichotomy that they presented, we'd be in a different environment. They present an idea. They say, Kevin, you can either throw people in prison and have a war on drugs that hurts the weak, or you can legalize marijuana. Which one do you want? Well, there is a big tide against criminalization, against incarceration. That's a winning combination for them. But the reality is, folks, there are so many other things we can do. We're not putting people in prison for marijuana as it is. But there are so many things we can do focusing on prevention, early intervention, awareness. What if we had an ad campaign for marijuana, 1/10 of the size of the Truth campaign for tobacco? Imagine the progress, just 1/10 of the size, what that would look like. There are so many things we can do that we're not trying. And instead, we're presented with this false dichotomy. We also are not being told about the advertising and promotion, the coupons, the ads, the sponsorships, the e-cigarettes that are now the new way. You know, my worry is, folks, marijuana is becoming a gateway to tobacco. It's making smoking cool again. And what's amazing is that with these new e-cigarettes and the new technology, of course, you can hide your marijuana use. No one will know you're using it. No one can smell it. And you might be using tobacco, not THC. And I have a feeling, go forward a little bit, that folks didn't really know what this was either when they're voting for this. If you show somebody in public health this who doesn't have a ton of expertise in marijuana, they will 9 times out of 10 tell you that this is heroin. This is black tar. It's this brown sticky substance on the end of a needle. That can't be marijuana. So we have been manipulated by this industry. We've been manipulated because they want to make it sound like it's about kids with seizures. We need to treat kids with seizures. I'm the first one to say there are many syndromes that need to be treated. We have 140,000 kids that need seizure treatment, that do not respond to traditional medications. But folks, we have medications going through the FDA for this. Great. I hope we have more. I want to have as many things that can help people. I have family members that have children with these rare neurological disorders. We want to get them any help that we can get them. But legalizing pot sodas, and with THC sodas, let's be clear, is not the way to do it. And they tug on our compassion because we are compassionate people. And what they're really after, folks, is this brain that's under 25, the developing brain, because that is where you're able to shape preferences. That is where you are able to make something really liked by somebody. And that's where you hook a lifetime customer. Look at our legal drugs today. Alcohol, 10% of Americans consume 75% of all alcohol in this country. Who do you think the alcohol industry cares about? The 90%? No. They care about this 10% that consumes. Whenever I see enjoy responsibly on the bottom of an alcohol ad, I laugh, because if everybody enjoyed alcohol responsibly, they wouldn't be making any money. They make money from alcoholics. There's no other way to put it. And it's the same thing, by the way, as with the opiate epidemic. Most people don't abuse OxyContin, folks. Most people don't abuse Vicodin. It sounds controversial, but it's true. The small number of people who abuse it for whatever reason, you can blame doctors, you can blame a lot of things people you can blame. The small number of people who use our prescription opiates are responsible for 90% of the problems and the addiction. And that is exactly the same thing. So why would it be any different? You know, we think that with marijuana, like, you know, this time it's going to be different. This time it's going to be changed. I don't have any evidence to understand why we would think it would be different at all. And so the active ingredient in marijuana, THC, we've just become much better farmers in this country. We are much better at agriculture than we used to be. It's good news for a lot of different crops, probably bad news for our brains, because we don't know what high THC stuff is doing to our brains. We don't even have that research. There's some research coming out of Colorado I've seen, and Dr. Wang, you have great people on the cusp here. Dr. Chris Thurstone, Ken Finn I talked about earlier, Katie Wells looking at pregnant postpartum women. I mean, the public health community is really trying to stand up. It's difficult in this environment with the industry, but they're not looking at policy. They're just looking at our bodies and brains and saying, wait a minute, we don't know what this stuff is doing. THC has been so manipulated in the modern plant. We have genetically bred out things that actually don't get you high anymore, like CBD. The CBD oil that everyone talks about, you can't find that in street marijuana or marijuana that's high in THC. Yes, you can go to different shops here and get different strains, and I guess you're going to believe them that they would, you know, that they're truthful in their claims. But even if you do, if you want to get high, you're not getting high from CBD. You're getting high from today's high THC. You're seeing kid-friendly products, potency, as I said, increasing, aggressive marketing, contaminants. They said we were going to be able to regulate it so there wouldn't be contaminants in it. Who do you think is smarter? The state bureaucrats that are playing catch-up on the EPA list of non-allowed adulterants and additives and environmental carcinogens, or the industry that has a financial incentive to make the best kind of pot that they can make no matter what they put in it? And again, there are people in state government in this state, I know that many of them very well, they're trying to do the right thing. They didn't make this happen. They're just the people implementing. I get it. It's not a knock on them. But if we think that we're actually going to be controlling this, oh, and by the way, at least you got rid of all your drug dealers in Colorado, right? They're gone. Yeah. They're all like went to dental school or something. Maybe there's been a big enrollment here at CCU, Jeff. Maybe that could be something. We actually think that they're going to start selling ice cream or something. You're able to outwit the legal regulated industry. And well, at least you have all this tax revenue, right? School's #1 in the country now. Teachers being overpaid. You have so much money you don't know what to do with, right? I mean, at the very least, does everybody who needs THC marijuana treatment in the state get it for free? Why not? You made $300 million, they said. They're touting it. Oh, they are all over the country. They'd love to talk about you. $1.3 billion in sales, $300 million in tax revenue. Are you able even to take care of your own? How about alcohol treatment? Opiate treatment. You have the second largest opiate addiction in this. Have you been able to pay for treatment for people who have heroin as their primary drug, the fentanyls? What's happening with alcohol treatment? Are you able to pay for that for people? So this magic idea is nothing more than magic. And I am convinced that when people hear the truth and know about it, and when they have to live next to a pot shop and smell that every day when they take their kids to school, it gets old very quickly. I'm telling you, as a visitor, it gets old. Why would I want to stay in the 16th Street Mall anymore? I mean, go to visitdenver.com. I mean, they are admitting, the tourism site is admitting the problems they're having, the convention goers, the feedback they're getting. I'm not sure if the state politicians have found that out yet and took that webpage down yet, but it doesn't do well for reputations. And it's because of this very, very greedy industry. You now have the wonderful distinction of being the #1 youth use rate in the country. Now, of course, you can hear from folks saying, no, but marijuana use has gone down among kids. Great. Well, how many schools did you look at for that? Well, we left out the 2nd and 3rd largest districts. Oh, okay. Well, what about the other? Well, we left out the 6th and 7th largest districts too. Oh, okay. So is it representative of the state? No. But it's going down. Well, folks, that doesn't tell us anything. What we do hear from, though, is the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the only representative sample of drug use in the country for Colorado, the state sample. And that state sample puts Colorado at number 1. It also, what about the 18 to 25-year-olds? So your brain doesn't, 18 isn't the magic number in this game, folks. About 30 years old is. But 18 to 25, what's happening with our young people as they're competing with China and India and all the other countries for 21st century jobs? Are they ready? I hear you having a hard time filling construction jobs in this state because you can't find people to pass a drug test. So I don't see how this helps us. I mean, again, this isn't political. I don't see how this helps us make America great again by any means. I don't see how pot has ever done that for anybody. And we were fooled once by big tobacco. I don't want to be fooled again. I'm not going to go through all the data, but I do. Some things do kind of stick out for me. The fact that more Colorado youth on probation are testing positive for marijuana, more kids that are in trouble. The fact that marijuana offenses in high schools and elementary schools have gone up. Okay, so now you know you have more officers dealing with this at schools. Do you have more student assistant officers at school now with all the tax money that's raining down from the sky? Have you been able to hire more people to enforce the law, at least among young people? I didn't think so, but these offenses are going up. Even the New York Times admitted marijuana taxes won't save state budgets. We've seen this play out. You have a lottery here. Do you have a lottery here? Oh, okay. So is that helping your schools be number 1 in the country at least? I mean, what's happening with that? We are promised these things over and over again. Chris Stifler saying in the Denver Post why pot Texas can't solve Colorado's budget problem. And look at our revenue and costs. Alcohol costs 10 times more than it brings in. Tobacco even more so. Now you're talking about a drug, marijuana, that combines some of the worst parts of tobacco, inhaling something, and the worst parts of alcohol, intoxication. Tobacco doesn't make you intoxicated. Dirty little secret. You can drive a car and smoke a cigarette. You can go to work and smoke a cigarette. But THC actually messes with your mind. And so what are we doing in terms of the costs with that? The emergency room, I'm not, you all know this, but the emergency room admissions that have gone up in this state among very, very young kids, the black market that remains. In Oregon, 70% or more of the marijuana market in that state is illegal. That's what the leaked police report said, and then the state had to disavow. The state said, no, we don't know anything about that report. We actually had to file a public records request, which we're doing in this state as well, because we can't get straight answers from government officials who have to defend their legacy. I hate to say it. Very well-meaning, nice people, but they have to defend a legacy. And it's in their lap, and they want to make the best of it. I get it, but we have to keep them accountable. And that's something that Justin with the Marijuana Accountability Coalition is going to be doing in the future, and I hope that you can connect with them. They'll be giving a workshop later on youth. So in legalized states, we're seeing workplace protections is now a new issue. They want to bring public use. You know this. They want to talk about, I mean, can you believe that we're actually debating public use again of a smoked drug? I thought we've been there, done that. I thought we learned, but here we go. And then the other issue I love, it makes me so sad actually, but it's incredible to bring up, is the fact that the juvenile arrest rate before and after legalization is higher now than it was before. In fact, more kids of color being arrested. So I don't see how this is helping with social justice, especially when I look at Denver and the census, and I see the broad Hispanic population here on the western side of the city, the African-American smaller on the northern part of the city, northeast, and then you see the concentration of where the pot shops are. Of course they're going after the weakest in society. That's what you do when you're a predatory industry. You know, folks, addiction is not only going up here in your brain and your DNA. Addiction is something that is formed by your environment as well. And the industries know that. And so that's why there are 8 times as many liquor stores in poorer communities of color in this country than in upper class communities. That's why OxyContin and Purdue Pharma focused on poor rural whites of Kentucky and West Virginia in the late 2000s. They go after the folks who don't have the ready access to health care, housing, education, who don't have daddy to bail them out if something goes wrong, or the best lawyer in the state, who don't have the job waiting for them even if they test positive for a drug, who don't have access to $100,000 a year to go to Malibu and go to drug treatment if something happens to go wrong. And so when you're that addictive industry, you are absolutely focused on the weakest in society. They will be some of your best customers. And you start to look at the drug use rates among the vulnerable kids in this state under 25, and you will see the corresponding increases among the most vulnerable kids, among the LGBT youth, among young kids of color, and the poorest of any race as well. We need to wake up if we think this is about social justice, folks. This is about making guys that look like me and live where I live. I live in Manhattan, rich. This is about Wall Street and Silicon Valley. This isn't about anything else. And I'm fine with not criminalizing young people. We don't want to criminalize young people or people that have a drug problem. We want to get them help, get them treatment, early intervention, mental health. We haven't even talked about comorbidity, mental health disorder, which we'll talk about later, but that's the stuff that scares me the most, the schizophrenia, psychosis, depression, anxiety. I mean, anxiety for anyone under 30 is already, I can't fathom how much it's off the charts already versus my generation. And now you're going to add this to it. Obviously, the construction issue we talked about. I want to go forward because I want to have a few minutes for questions. Look, I get that you've legalized in the state. There are some things you can do to make a very bad situation a little bit better. And I know groups have focused on this, edibles and high THC concentrates. Why should the marijuana industry serve on a rulemaking body that determines how marijuana is sold and packaged and marketed? That one I can't figure out. Can you imagine if Philip Morris served on the board of the Tobacco Control Commission? Or if we allowed Purdue Pharma to help write our national prescription drug strategy? It makes zero sense that the people who are going to be regulated are the regulators. When I see journalist after journalist in this state, when I see marijuana regulator after marijuana regulator go into the industry, I get it, there's money there. But where are the prohibitions and some rules on that? I mean, in the Obama administration, I couldn't talk to anybody for 5 years that had anything to do with any program that I touched. Where are the stricter rules here? I know there are some rules, but not many. Advertising and promotion. Advertising, we don't have Joe Camel anymore. We don't have the Marlboro Man. I don't understand why and by the way, you say, well, they're not permitted. Well, why do I see the coupons everywhere? Why do you see signs everywhere? A science-based public awareness campaign like I talked about earlier, and then drugged driving. And if you think you're ever going to get to a 0.08 for like alcohol for marijuana, think again. Metabolizes in the body so much differently. It sticks in your fat, stays longer, affects people differently. But I think that if you're driving impaired, if you fail a behavioral test on the road, and if on an oral swab we can detect that you've used marijuana fairly recently, that should probably be good enough evidence that you shouldn't be on the road. Car crashes have increased in this state. They've doubled in Washington state as well, related to marijuana. At the very least, we need to put some protections in. Good intentions do not matter. Market dynamics in this issue matter. I don't care if you have the best prevention campaign in the world and you're the industry. It's about market dynamics. And until we realize that, absolutely the pot industry will become another big tobacco. They're already writing the rules of regulation. We can reform our laws. Absolutely, kids with seizures should get whatever helps them. Absolutely, kids caught with marijuana should not be imprisoned. Absolutely, we shouldn't target young people of color. Fix those things. But you don't have to fix them by making the problem worse with rampant commercialization. The industry has its sights set on 2018 in multiple states around the country. We'll be working very hard. Michigan is going to be the next state with a ballot initiative in 2018. We're setting up an apparatus there. I do want to end with a quote by the world's foremost scientist on marijuana. Her and I had the privilege of being with Pope Francis recently to talk about this issue, which has been a pretty incredible experience at the Vatican. And one thing that she said at that meeting, which was also published, was an incredible thing, which is basically the effects of a drug, legal or illegal, on health are determined not only by its pharmacologic properties, not only by the way it affects your brain or body, but also by its availability and social acceptability. She said, in this respect, legal drugs like alcohol and tobacco offer a sobering perspective, accounting for the greatest burden of disease associated with drugs. Greatest burden, more than heroin, more than fentanyls, more than OxyContin, more than meth, more than crack. That means a lot. The greatest burden, not because they are more dangerous than illegal drugs, not because when you have a beer, that's more dangerous than, using fentanyl, but because their legal status allows for more widespread exposure. That's what this is about, and it's about normalization and widespread exposure. That's why these young people to my right are dollar signs to this industry. Because if they can expand widespread exposure and normalization, they will get rich. So we obviously have a lot of work to do. I am excited by the various groups and people I see in this room. I absolutely think there is a pushback coming. I think that unfortunately we have to feel it before we sometimes have any action on it. I mean, how long did it take for us to realize smoking in restaurants wasn't a good idea? How long did it take for us to hear that, to realize that Philip Morris selling marijuana, although they're going to do that too, by the way, the tobacco industry colluding with marijuana. Don't think that they're, not looking at marijuana. In fact, the biggest marijuana industry group is partnering with the tobacco industry as we speak. So we have that little thing to look forward to. But how long did it take for us to realize that candy cigarettes weren't exactly aimed at adults? It will take some time, but I am confident we're going to realize that. We're going to need voices like yourselves out there. It's so hard not to be discouraged here. It's easy for me in a lot of the states that don't legalize. And by the way, they look at Colorado. I have to say one vignette. We were at the UN, okay, with the Netherlands, okay? The Netherlands, what are they known for? Pot, right? 1976, they de facto legalized. We used to look at, Dave will tell you, we used to look at the Netherlands in the 2000s. When we were, in the 2000s, we would look at the Netherlands like, oh my God, those pothead Dutch people, what are they doing? And do they know what they're doing by legalizing marijuana? They're just, God, what are they thinking? Folks, it's embarrassing to go to international meetings now. They look at us and say, Kevin, let's talk about Colorado. That's all they want to talk about, Colorado. I mean, they can't point out Colorado on a map, Doug, but they know what your reputation is. And they're like, wait a minute, Kevin, you guys were the ones saying we were kind of crazy for allowing coffee shops and allowing people 21 and over with no advertising to use little marijuana here and there. You now have 99% THC that you're advertising for next to nothing in your newspaper that every kid under 18 is reading. You now have products that resemble candies. You now have all of this kid-friendly exposure. You have lobbyists, Kevin. They don't have lobbyists there for the pot industry. They can't believe what we're doing. In fact, do you know that they classify THC above 16% in the same way they classify crack cocaine in the Netherlands? What do you think they think when they see what you guys have to offer in the beautiful menus? It's an amazing change, turning of tables. And I got to tell you, while we're having that discussion with the Netherlands, China, Japan, and South Korea and Singapore are cracking up. They're like, please, let us know how it goes. We'll check in with you in 20 years. We'll see how your young people are doing. They're ecstatic. They're trying to hold in their enthusiasm. Folks, we need to wake up. We're in a slumber by the industry that has bullied, pushed us down, kicked us while we're down, saying that we are the dinosaurs from the Stone Age who want to put everybody in prison, that we are outdated. Folks, we have the science on our side. We have the evidence clearly on our side. It will take some time for things to, I'm not saying the sky is falling now and this is it's a beautiful state. It's a beautiful place to be. I'm always in awe when I open those curtains in the hotel room and see those mountains. It's amazing. We're not saying the sky has fallen, but we're saying things are not looking too good, and we're really worried about what it's going to look like in 10 more years. Marijuana is a slow kill drug. That's what I talk about with people struggling with this. It's not heroin. It doesn't transform your life tomorrow, usually, although now with 99%, God knows. But generally, this is something that is over time with a kid. This is a 13-year-old who starts to use that, doesn't do as many extracurriculars as they used to. Big deal. Well, when they're 15, you know what? I'm not going to take algebra this year. I'm going to just kind of go to pre-algebra. And when they're 17, what happened to your friends that used to play? Well, I actually hang out with a different group of friends now. Oh, okay. Well, all of those things individually, when they're 18, I'm going to apply to the community college. I'm actually not going to go for the 4-year. I want to take some more time, figure things out. Individually, those things don't seem like a big deal. They happen. But when you look at the trajectory over time and what that's doing among a vast majority of the population, that's something we need to be worried about. But I'm confident that we have the truth, we have the science. At the end of the day, industry will not prevail, I'm certain, even though they have a very strong motivation to do so. But we're going to need your voices to stand up, because none of you were around when we normalized tobacco in the early 1900s. We can't blame you, anybody in this room, for the Marlboro Man or Joe Camel. But in 100 years, when their kids and grandkids are meeting here again, it's gonna be up to us now on whether or not they're gonna say, what were they thinking? Why didn't they do more? And I know you're already doing a lot, but why didn't they do more? And I hope that their grandkids are not going to say that. I don't think they will, because I think we can turn this around. So I'm excited about the day. Incredible group of speakers I'm honored to share the stage with, and many of you in the audience. And just thank you so much for being here and your activism. I know we will overcome this. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Sabet, that was just fantastic. Thank you. I might need some water here. Excuse me. Our next speaker is Dr. David Murray, Senior Fellow of the Hudson Institute. Dr. Murray, where he co-directs the Center for Substance Abuse Policy Research, while serving previous posts as the Chief Scientist and Associate Deputy Director, Supply Reduction. Thanks. Future governor candidate right there. Thank you. While serving previous posts as Chief Scientist and Associate Deputy Director, Supply Reduction in the federal government's Office of National Drug Control Policy, Dr. Murray directed extensive scientific research on all aspects of the drug problem and helped coordinate high-level interagency efforts to limit the production of illicit drugs and counter the transnational criminal organizations that control their global shipment and market. Before entering government, Dr. Murray was executive director of the Statistical Assessment Service and held academic appointments at Connecticut College, Brown, Brandeis, and Georgetown universities. He's the author of numerous scholarly papers, essays, and commentaries, co-author of the widely noted book, It Ain't Necessarily So, How Media Make and Unmake the Scientific Picture of Reality, and a frequent guest on major network television and radio programs. Dr. Murray holds an MA and PhD in social anthropology from the University of Chicago. Please welcome Dr. David Murray.
Thank you. Just a second. Yeah, I thought I did, or something like that. Good, thank you. We can just roll forward to the first slide. Yeah, I'm David Murray. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be amongst these people and several old friends, indeed. Thanks so much to Kevin for arousing motivation for us to face what must be done here. I'm controlling the slides. Is this the issue? All right, we've got Sam. Can we get back to mine, perhaps? Is someone running this, or should I just keep going forward or go back? All right, we started with mine, and all right. These are Kevin's, I think. All right. Well, let's start with that. There we are. I'm sorry to do this to you. I'm going to sort of a forced march. These are going to be data-focused slides to a large extent. My effort is going to try and say, you know Colorado, you know the circumstance here. Do you know the wider context in which this is taking place? I've got some time here to discuss the wider national impact and some of the social pathologies we're seeing. And just to let you know, what I'm sneaking up on is we do want to see a tighter awareness of the potential connection with things like the opioid epidemic, the overdose tragedies, and the rest that early adolescent initiation do seem to be related to. However, yesterday I was leaving Washington, D.C. Washington Post had this in their Metro section. Colorado affects everybody, and marijuana legalization here. You are the first, but you're by no means the last. U.S. Postal Service manager was sentenced yesterday to more than 8 years in prison for converting postal workers in Washington, D.C. into a virtual marijuana distribution network. Using West Coast drugs that were shipped to him, He was the postal manager, and he converted an entire team of postal delivery people for multiple pounds of marijuana being shipped to him from California. When he was arrested, the search of his house, prosecutors found in his car several disguises, clothing, 2 loaded handguns, 35 kilograms of marijuana, and more than $390,000 in cash. That's corruption. Federal government corruption. That's how profoundly it's penetrated, how widely it's gone. I'm going to focus on these slides, and bear with me as we go through this. My effort is to try and say this is the most tendentious and political of my slides. It's sort of unavoidable, but these are the realities. This is 12th grade marijuana use over time through successive administrations. And it's not so much that the individual presidents did that much one way or the other, but they have set in motion policies and provided leadership. But what I want to point out is it has gone down. Youth use dropped dramatically, and you'll hear continuously, there's nothing going to be done, it's all futile, it's an endless, no, you can do things. Policies can make a difference. You can achieve genuine gains against this with a very steep drop up through 1990, 1992. It then rose again. It then started back down again for a successive period of time, and now it is back. This is 12th graders. I suspect that we are not fully aware as to what exactly is happening in this area and here. We're told it's somewhat down amongst youth. I'm not convinced that that's completely true. Nonetheless, what has the marijuana epidemic done for us? First of all, I think we have to fault ourselves. You in Colorado was the first, the other states as well. We in Washington as well, we failed. We failed at the very first step, which is prevention. And the biggest step you could have made for prevention was not at the individual household level. It was not letting this thing happen legally by voting it in, by enabling an industry to so commandeer the resources and it's insulating itself, and it's now spreading dramatically as a social contagion that is enormous. There are so many states that have now legalized, and this is a failure of prevention. We are left with treatment and remediation as our only efforts, or efforts to constrain supply. And I've already argued here in Colorado before the necessity of trying to constrain the availability and supply. That's because we lost the very first battle and are seeing now the tidal wave, the tsunami of impact of our having lost that battle. California has about 40 million residents that will now soon be under a legal regime. Canada has about 37 million residents. They're going to be under a legal regime very likely. The flooding impact of this is magnifying the consequences of what were just a few states, what the practice in federalism, well, nonsense. This is a runaway, and I'm really concerned that we're not fully appreciating the degree to which this damage is already in the system. It's not damage that's coming. It's damage that's here. We just haven't seen it yet, and it's starting to surface. We're saying, well, we should stop this. They're inside the castle walls. And history shows us an inevitable future course. The damage becomes unsustainable, and communities will not actually take action and respond. They'll be in denial until there is so much damage that they eventually say, we can't tolerate this longer, and they'll take the necessary actions to grasp the nettle and push back. But we're losing ground. Look to the future. 2016, the most recent Monitoring the Future look at past month marijuana use for high school, 12th grade, 22.5%, 10th lower, 8th lower. Okay, about 1 in 5 seniors is a marijuana user, but 69% of high school seniors no longer view regular marijuana use as harmful. The biggest changes we're seeing are in the adult population, where the prevalence has been soaring, and particularly the college age, 18 to 25-year-olds that we know about, and those who are enrolled in college are actually much worse than those 18 to 25s who aren't in college. Why is the college locus such a place for extraordinary marijuana prevalence increase? Well, to some degree, that's where the legal and underage meet. Most of the states have regimes for 21-year-olds and above can purchase. Well, they're cohabiting with, in social life with, at parties with 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds who've just arrived. It's on college campuses where the greatest cross-fertilization takes place between the underage and the 21-year-old adults who are now sharing extraordinarily high-potency marijuana. Marijuana use, some NPF tells us, amongst college students is at its highest level in 30 years. 40%. 2 out of every 5 are routine, regular consumers of high-potency marijuana, and this is in 2016. That's retrospective. It's worse now, and it's worsening every year. When California debated legalization, the Rand Corporation estimated the impact would produce a 58% increase in consumption. That means both prevalence and the frequency and quantity of use by those who are already consuming. Where did we go? Back in 2008, there were 25 million past year users of marijuana nationwide. By 2015, it was 35 million past year users. We wrote about this a couple of years ago saying, can we project to see where we're going to go? 44% increase in 7 years in the number of past year marijuana users in the nation. Well, about 6% a year is what we projected out as the likely impact if legalization were to take place. Most likely, by the way, these are undercounts, particularly of the youth population. And the common reason we should be very wary when we're told that youth really are not going up that much at the high school level, the dropout rate is extraordinary for heavy users of marijuana. They're not being measured anymore because they're no longer in high school. They're in alternative schools, they're dropping out of the system, they're not being caught. So we say, hey, prevalence is not rising that much. Yeah, because they're not there. They're damaged. The second thing you're going to find out is people are not catching the degree to which marijuana consumption has transformed into non-smoked. Do you smoke marijuana is a standard question. No, not really. Well, how are you catching the comestibles, the drinks, the edibles, the shatter, the vape? No, because they're not asking the question sufficiently to be able to tease out what is a new form of use that can be 40 to 50% of the kids are using in ways that allow them to say, no, I'm not smoking more marijuana. We're not asking the right questions. So we may be missing something that is actually worse than we fear. And of course, it's the unit THC, the high degree potency, that you really need to be measuring, not the poundage of leaf that someone's consuming. It's how much unit THC are they being exposed to on each occasion, and that is skyrocketing, as we well know. Now, this is back from 2 years ago in terms of when the data were gathered and then finally processed. This is the 2015 look at drug use in America from the National Household Survey. So it's 2015. Marijuana is 20.2 million people in the United States for regular use, past month, regular use. 20.2 million people out of how many? Not 320 million. This is out of 240 million. That's the population 12 and older, the only people who show up in the survey. So about 1 out of 10, regular user. So it's worse than we think. We think it's a big country. No, it's just those 12 and older. So what happened in the meantime? Well, we were anticipating about a 6% increase when we looked at those RAND data and other issues about the yearly increase in past year use. Here's past month use. This means someone who's got a problem. They're routinely consuming large amounts. Whether it's 20 days a month, 3 days a month, they're going to say, yes, past month. So that gets counted as a category. Many degrees of intensification are contained within that single category. In a single year between 2015, which I just showed you, and now 2016, the use of any illicit drug rose from 27 million to 28.6 million users. There's my 6% increase. But that's for any illicit. What about marijuana? We just now know from the most recent household survey released for 2016, everything's retrospective, we're always looking backwards, the damage has already been done. Marijuana past month rose from 22 million that you just saw on the last slide to 24 million users nationwide. An 8% increase in a single year. Now, I don't know what kind of stock holdings you've got, but you see 8% increase year over year over year. You've got something that's growing quite dramatically. Can you extrapolate to 8% growth in the population of a country when California and Canada are just coming online as legalization spreads? Now, prevalence rates are one thing. That's the number of people who report using. Past one, yeah, past year, okay. But there's another factor that seems to be going on, which is an intensification of use by those who are already using. They use more frequently, they use more volume, they move consuming more unit THC. So here's the intensification. More uses more frequently with higher potency, daily marijuana use. This is from the Washington Post. Recently, it started to pay attention. Daily marijuana use rises sharply. The percent who were using the drug 300 days or more out of a year, daily use, went from 12.2% to 18.6%. That's 50% rise from 2002 to 2016. So you have to look at both. People may say, well, the same number of kids are using. Yeah, but they used to use 3 times a month. Now they're using every day. And daily use is that form of use most correlated with damage, with intense pathologic outcomes for daily use. This is addictive, dependent use that produces brain change. And here's the same thing up for prevalence and intensity, use up steeply. Back in 1992, when we saw that blue curve where I had the administrations, it was the low point back there, 9% of past month users reported that they were heavy users, that they used 25 or more days out of a month. By 2014, that figure is now 40%. Those who use, say past month, yeah, they're heavy users, daily or near daily. And as we've learned already, the near daily users account for about 80% of cannabis sales in recreational states, according to Mark Kleiman, who helped states formulate some of these programs. That's why cannabis stores, he argues, feature high-potency marijuana. It's too intense for casual users, the 90% shatter and wax. But the heavy users have become so tolerant, they've got to have it to get high. So we're moving in that direction with intensification and prevalence spread. Both of these things, intensification and prevalence, increase the social pathologies, not just drug using. All the things that attend to drug use and that are correlated with increases in societal and biomedical consequences, such things as marijuana-associated pathologies in the wider society. School performance can be demonstrably shown to be affected by drug use, particularly cannabis use. IQ loss for the adolescent. As much as 8 IQ points have been reported in the literature for longitudinal studies. Over time, from age 13 to age 38, IQ 8-point loss. Workplace readiness, you know about this issue. What's happening nationwide in the workforce is we're finding greater difficulty finding trained people who can pass drug tests who don't have intoxication problems. Military recruitment's being affected. Higher and higher percentages can't meet the military requirements. Domestic violence is associated with high marijuana consumption for both parties, the perpetrator and the victim. Matter of fact, the people most at risk are young women who are cannabis users who become victimized in domestic violence. That association is rising. The rise in sexually transmitted diseases, you may have seen syphilis is making a comeback, gonorrhea, chlamydia. These are associated and correlated with heavy cannabis use. And of course, then the unseen as yet impact that we now know and fear, we've already planted this, is the impact from pregnant women, particularly young women, who are consuming cannabis with a child who is going to be very likely or at high risk for low birth weight, neonatal developmental issues, including cognitive issues, and of course then as infants are already exposed and have susceptibilities for a wide variety of other difficulties because of this exposure. And then the psychoses, which is strongly associated with heavy and early adolescent cannabis use. Associated doesn't mean proven caused, it means highly associated, risk factor elevated. It makes sense to not increase that capacity. Then finally, this other effect, I think, that we need to think about, the social pathologies, is the spillover to the opioid epidemic, which is rather stunning. I'm sure you're familiar with 52,000 Americans in 2015 lost their lives, but directly drug-induced overdose deaths. About 33,000 of those were opioid. Well, that was 2015. That's retrospective. What about 2016? We don't know yet. CDC won't report until December. We have preliminary numbers for 2016, and it looks far worse. Still accelerating. It's now 65,000 estimated Americans will die in 2016 from drug-induced overdose deaths. The strong majority of which will be opioid related. And it's going to worsen and seems to be accelerating. And that these markets work together. Where you find a marijuana market that's recreational and legal, you also find an illicit market that coincides with it and is not driven out. And you also find wherever the illicit market shows up, there are poly-drug traffickers. They're major networkers. They provide you don't just get to choose one. Just take the marijuana, please. Don't bring the meth, the cocaine, and the opioids. No, they do. They bring them all. And they coincide in these communities. They're the same market, the same providers, the same funding, the same cartels, the same transnational criminal control. They're in there where you find marijuana markets. They're there with the other drugs. And adolescent exposure confers a high susceptibility of greater risk for subsequent opioid disorder. That's a gateway dimension you've got to consider, which is the reality of an elevated risk. So, most epidemics burn out. as the susceptible succumb. Happens with flu, happens even with Zika and Ebola. Goes through the susceptible population, eventually starts to burn out, eventually subsides in sort of an endemic at higher level, dangerous, but not necessarily epidemic growth, which is exponential-like. But since 2010, the opioid epidemic has been on a continuing, not only rise, but accelerated rise. It hasn't burned through yet. And we know even into 2017, it's still increasing. Some of this, I would argue, has been clearly related to the huge rise in supply. Mexican supplies went up 170% for opium, poppy, and heroin supply, dramatically increased sometime around 2012 up through 2015. It's still increasing. We haven't kept track of it. But we're really concerned that the supply that's flooding the borders has gone up enormously. And then to that was added the greater lethality. The lethality comes from the synthetics, fentanyl and the fentanyl analogs that are being added to heroin, added to counterfeit pills that look like OxyContins, but they're not. That's where the lethality is coming from. But I'm also going to suggest to you that why this epidemic is not yet burning out is because there are new entrants continuously coming in. New people are becoming susceptible and being drawn into the opioid overdose disorder framework, and that they are, I'm going to argue, inducted through early adolescent exposure and the gateway dimension that presents the susceptibility of these adolescents to then mature into, at later in life, exposure to the opioid epidemic. It's there in the market, it's there in the community, and unfortunately it confers a biological individual susceptibility to them if they've had heavy exposure early. So here are the inflection points for the opioid epidemic, and this should worry you greatly. This is 2010, September of 2010. This is a long rise. This is the monthly rate of heroin poisoning mortalities. From 2004 to here, it's relatively flat. It's rising a little bit, but that's not a very large increase. As a matter of fact, if you go this arrow back quite a ways, it's relatively flat for a long period of time. Then there's a rather dramatic set of bumps here, and then the takeoff in 2010. What are the social factors in play in 2010 in a new administration that lead to this steady acceleration? This is only up through 2014, by the way. This curve is far worse now, much, much higher than it was for heroin. And here we can see the standard narrative about how this happened. Well, you have to understand there was OxyContin, there was the opioid pharmaceuticals, and that somehow or other people crossed over when they couldn't get their opioids. They then switched from medical practice to heroin. That's not a sufficient answer for what's happening here. Matter of fact, it's not even a particularly sound answer in terms of what's actually going on with the data. It's one contributing factor. It's a relatively small factor. Something else is happening in the acceptability and use of illicit drugs and the markets that bring these illicit drugs and traffic them. Somewhere around 2010, the effect starts to be felt. The standard opioid narrative is partial and insufficient. The crossover from medical use, misuse of pharmaceuticals to the heroin fentanyl market is probably not going to account for very much. The opioid inflection is prior to the constraints we saw, the crackdowns on pharmaceuticals. Since 2002, the number of pharmaceutical prescriptions have started to decline. 2012, sorry. The decline has been somewhat small, but down. It's not been increasing. And yet, we've seen the reformulation of drugs like OxyContin. What seems to have followed from that is that people began to be polydrug users. They simply moved over to Opana or dilaudid hydromorphones or oxymorphones and added them to their use potential. They didn't simply give up OxyContin and suddenly start heroin. Because what happens out here is if you look at abusers who are at risk for overdose death, they are polydrug users. The additive model is the most consequential way of thinking about this rather than the crossover. They simply add polydrug opportunism to their already given repertoire of drug consumption. Adolescent initiation of polydrug use confers increased risk for subsequent opioid use. This is a Colorado slide, by the way. I'll skip through these, you sort of know this, but opioid overdose deaths, meaning pharmaceuticals, actually kind of declined a little bit in 2016 or 2015, but heroin overdose deaths increased 23% in 2016. This is what I mean by the polydrug market. You can't invite just one. I'm checking my time. Yeah. This is an FBI most wanted poster, just to let you know the kind of people who are running the drugs at us at a continuing rate. But look at the features for which he's wanted. 5 kilograms or more of cocaine, 50 grams or more of methamphetamine, 1 kilogram or more of heroin, 1,000 kilograms or more of marijuana, including use of firearms. This is the market that shows up with marijuana and then induces through that. The marijuana market is much bigger, 25, 35 million, than is the market for heroin, but they coincide when they get to your town. All right, this is a little bit out of date. It's 2015 data. I tried to load 2016 data from the New York Times, the provisionals I mentioned. Their interactive graph was difficult, but I at least pointed out to you. This is the lethality of various opioids contributing and other drugs contributing to the drug overdose deaths. And the top one here, the red, that's all pharmaceuticals, the OxyContins and the Vicodins and so forth, which is relatively quickly overtaken. And there's our year, 2010. The green line here is, just heroin. And then look what heroin does. It intersects in 2015, the same number of deaths nationwide from all pharmaceuticals that are opioids and from heroin alone, about 13,000 apiece at this point. What's interesting is this is a high risk applied to a small population, heroin, 1 to 2.5 million users, but very high risk of lethality, the drug use, compared to a low risk for a large population. Got 85 million US participants in pharmaceutical opioid use, of whom 13,000 die. Well, the rates are so different because a large population to which a relatively low risk applies produces this sort of effect. And likewise with marijuana, I'm going to argue, a huge population of users in the many millions is going to produce impact even if the individual rate of a crossover from cannabis to opioid is relatively small. The risk may be relatively small in each individual case, but the prevalent societal burden of this is so large because of the size of the population. And then, by the way, this orangey yellow line here that's going here, this is fentanyl and the synthetics that are added to heroin that are now marketed themselves directly. This is 2015. The New York Times article would have shown you that since this date, this line, this orange line, has now gone up somewhere about here. It has surpassed heroin, surpassed all the others. The pharmaceuticals are going down. Heroin's rising, heroin plus fentanyl, 540% in 3 years is the increase in overdose deaths attributed to fentanyl. It's completely out of control. Highly, highly dangerous, lethal. We got 200 pounds of it recently seized in urban centers. This is enough to kill 30 million Americans. It's an extraordinary lethal drug. It's being manufactured in Mexico and in China and shipped in to the United States, where it's being put into counterfeit pills and bedding. All right, lethality is a function of the population. There's the 85 million. I'm showing the relative risk hasn't changed for the pharmaceuticals. It's about the same amount deaths per kilogram as it was back in the 1990s as it is now. But what's changed is the lethality of the illicit drugs. And it is the illicit drugs that are now driving the opioid epidemic, not pharmaceutical practice. And we're just repeating what we've already seen. There's the fentanyl deaths, 540% in 3 years. Okay, this is condensed, a little difficult, but I just want to summarize this. This is Bob DuPont's recent article, soon to come out. Opioid overdose deaths, he looked at. He realized they almost always involve the use of other addictive drugs, as we've heard. 95% of the opioid overdose deaths average about 2 to 4 other drugs are found on board, with a maximum of 11 in addition to the opioids. So these are polydrug users who get into serious trouble. And what we're doing, he argues, is ignoring the significant role of adolescent initiation to drug use in the opioid overdose epidemic at older ages. Only about 4% of people who use prescription opioids non-medically will initiate heroin within 5 years from their first prescription use. Of 4,500 individuals treated for opioid addiction, whose first exposure was through a doctor from their physician, a prescription from their physician, 95% here report prior or coincident use of other psychoactive drugs. Alcohol was used by 92%, 93%, marijuana use by 87%. So they're being preconditioned. The idea here is early polydrug use often sets the stage for later transition from medical to addictive use. I've said it 3 or 4 times. It's something that we really need to confront and explore more thoroughly, is the degree to which this is a feeder for the other pathologies we're seeing. Kevin referenced a recent study just came out in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Here it is. Cannabis use as a risk factor for opioid use disorder. American Journal of Psychiatry. And what they did is this survey called NASARC, the National Epidemiologic Survey on Alcohol-Related Conditions. And it does wave 1, wave 2. It's longitudinal. It follows people through time. And it did wave 1 in 2001, 2003, did wave 2, 2004, 2005, and it compares what's happening to people. So if someone initiated cannabis use at wave 1, we go back a few years later, and what are they doing now? Are they still using cannabis? Is their disorder worsened? Are they using other drugs? So it's a good example of how you can longitudinally see what happens to people with various initiations. And here's their conclusion. Cannabis use at wave 1 was associated with increased incident non-medical prescription of opioid use and opioid use disorder. Now, the actual odds ratio were between 5.78 and 7.90. They made statistical adjustments for potential confounders and got it down to about 2 to 3 times greater risk. I think the unadjusted numbers are also pretty interesting here. There are multiple studies in addition to this epidemiologic survey that also show the capacity for a brain priming, crossover cross-synthesization of exposure to cannabinoids and exposure to opioids in animal models, in twin studies, found in humans as well. It looks as if there is this priming effect of early cannabis impact that then when confronted with opioid exposure, there's a stronger and more likely risk reaction to that phenomenon. That validation of a gateway hypothesis argument cannot be ignored. This, by the way, is troubling, not only because of the data that they show, but look when they ended. Ends in 2005. That was the last, almost done here, so you'll be happy to know. Well, unfortunately, I got myself into all the way through. 2005 was the last year for yeah. 2005 was the last year for the NASARC Wave 2. 2005 is a time when the opioid epidemic was still just rising and is far worse now, and the potency of cannabis and the degree of intensification of exposure were relatively lower than they are today. Very likely, these findings will be worse at the next wave when you go forward into 12 years later to see what the impact of high-potency cannabis use at intense levels and the increasing lethality of the synthetic drugs that have been added to heroin in terms of the susceptibility and correlation between this disorder, one disorder and the other. So just finally to sort of summarize, we published a lot of this at Hudson. We got citations there. I can address you to our website where we did do a marijuana threat assessment a little while ago. We go through the gateway hypothesis and the relative degree of statements about it, just to summarize a couple of things about at least the plausibility that what we're seeing is a correlation between these two epidemics. People addicted to marijuana are 3 times more likely to be addicted to heroin. Daily marijuana use was associated with significant increase in the expected odds of opiate, cocaine, stimulant, hallucinogen, inhalant, and tobacco use. Rates of other drug use disorders and common psychiatric conditions were highly correlated with the extent of cannabis involvement. Early marijuana use by itself, even after control for other covariates, comorbidity, socioeconomic status, increases significantly the use of other illicit drugs. Now, that's just a culling of representative findings of the last year or so of the potential risk of early marijuana exposure for its susceptibility to subsequent reaction to exposure to subsequent other epidemics. This should deeply trouble us because this has already happened. All we're seeing is an intensification and a growth of this. It's in the cards already. This is an experiment we've already run, and we're just now manifesting the consequences of this. It's very troubling, and it's hard to know how you ever get the political resources and the mobilization and the willpower to do the things that are necessary until the damage becomes so overwhelming to our institutions, to corruption, to medical institutions, to school performance, to our youth, to families, to violence issues, to the takeover of transnational criminal organizations running their own self-insulating and protective violence and coercion and monetary capacity to shape the future. This is a contest. I'm just saying we're losing ground. I got, what, 3 or 4 minutes for questions if you want. Let it be at that. Anybody got the willingness? Or, sorry to drive you through this so hard, but That's sort of what we look at when we look at the national picture. Take a look.
Probably got time for one question. One question. Any question? Yes, ma'am. Here, I'll give this to you.
Is this whole program going to be available online so our grandkids can watch it?
Yes, this whole program will be available online, including the breakout sessions. We're going to record those and put those online as well. Great. Well, let's give Dr. Murray a round of applause. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Well, I want to make sure that we stay on time, so we're going to take a brief break here. You only have about 5 minutes to be able to go to the breakout session, and we're going to start promptly at 10:30. We have a number of issues to cover, so grab one of these if you want outside. It'll direct you to the different breakout sessions. You can go and dive in to some of these issues more particularly, and then we'll be right back here for lunch at 12:15. Thanks so much.